Right now, I am standing almost at the bottom of our pond. This started back from the day we built the pond. It was always under-filtered. The pond was too big for the filtration system. 2 years ago, we had another company come in that added a secondary filtration system, but we don't think it was done right, and it didn't work. So we had a pond that day after day after day was just getting dirtier and worse and basically dying. The water quality of the pond over the last couple of years just kept going down. And no matter what we tried to treat it with, this is 150,000 gallons of water that is normally in here. You can't physically treat that much water by throwing a couple of little bacteria or something like that into it. You need to have your filtration system working properly. And for some reason that we cannot explain, which has never happened before, we have 5 waterfowl between ducks and geese that were otherwise young and healthy that passed away in the last couple of months with no explanation. And in the history of West Place, we've never had that before. So that made me very, very nervous. We couldn't explain what had happened. We had a lab run fecal samples. We tried to investigate. I talked with our vet and I talked with the wildlife clinic, and we all started talking about the water quality and was it possible that the water quality was having an effect. We couldn't really come to the determination that it was, but the water was clearly dirty. They asked me if we had any dead fish, and we did. We had a couple, but I couldn't see any live fish at all. I thought maybe we had 5 or 10 live fish and that the rest had died off. So at that point, that wasn't a lot of fish left. So we decided that the best thing we could do was to make the presumption that it was the water quality. And we really had to do something about it, because sometimes we let our horses graze loose, and where do they come for their water supply when they're out and they don't have access to their barn? They come to the pond. The kennel dogs sometimes will come down and get to run, and they might reach in and take a drink. We couldn't run the risk of affecting the health of a lot of other animals here besides just our waterfowl and our fish. So we had to drain the pond. This was something that was not in the 2018 budget. This was something that was done on an emergent basis. We were not prepared. We did not plan for this. Once again, I have a very talented husband who always says he does not volunteer at West Place. He's the best volunteer we've got, whether he wants to admit it or not. He, as an engineer, figured out what we needed for equipment and how we could get it for the cheapest amount possible, because we were going into a budget that just didn't have any money in it. So he figured out the pump we needed, the discharge system, and all the hoses that we needed. And frankly speaking, he and I got in here and we ran that pump for days and days and days. And we made sure that as the water was draining, all of the sludge, some that's below my feet here, but this sludge was all the way up. It went all the way up to the highest level, right to the surface of the water. So we also had to make sure that as the water was draining, all the sludge was getting flushed down. So my husband took a commercial fire hose that he could barely hold and barely maneuver. I give credit to every fireman out there because that is tough. And he hosed this down as the water level drained. He kept flushing all the sludge down into the bottom. So then when it got to the point where we couldn't drain anymore and we had to manually remove it, we had a couple of great volunteers agree to help us out. And took a couple of days, took a lot of man hours and a lot of volunteers, but they all came in, and bucket by bucket and shovel by shovel and wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, we finally got the rest out that the pump itself couldn't handle. Honestly, we don't know quite yet what it's setting us back financially. I know that we spent $700 on the initial pump and hoses to start to drain the water. The nets I owned 3 or 4 nets. We netted 350 fish. The nets took a beating, they all broke. So we needed to replace all those nets. Again, it was nets I owned. I now no longer own nets, but West Place does own a few new nets, so there was a cost to that as well. And then we were using the alpaca pool, and we were also using another donated tub to store our 350 fish, and we realized after a couple of days they didn't have enough surface area. They kept jumping out. We didn't lose any. We were able to save them all and get them all back in, but we needed to go out and buy a 300-gallon tank because we have 350 fish. We needed to net that. We also needed a filter, so we had to get a 300-gallon filter. So the tank was another $300. The filter was maybe another $200. That's the easy stuff. That's the early on stuff. We've got some big expenses coming up because as we look around, our liner is showing, and that's very dangerous because the liner can get ripped. So we need to get more gravel, more stone, and we need to fill in the liner. And that's everywhere. I'd say 20% of the pond has its liner showing. So we need several tons of stone. We realized over the years the lighting wasn't secured properly, so we're going to have to redo all the lighting. Again, fortunately, that will be a volunteer, my husband, who knows how to do all the electric, and he'll redo that. But we also realized that a lot of these shelves are collapsing, so you'll see the small boulders that are supposed to be holding up the stone behind it. You can see in different areas they've collapsed, so we need more boulders. Then the most important part is we have no plant life that is actually currently in this pond. Our swans are very destructive, and anything that we bought or we were sold and was installed, the swans wiped out. So we've been looking very hard for basically an invasive species. And I know most people don't want that in their pond or in their water source, but we need an invasive species. And fortunately, we know someone who is willing to give us a lot of cattails. And those cattails are very aggressive and very invasive. We've got to put those in order to protect the fish, because we've got above flying predators. We've got osprey, glossy ibis, white egret, a great blue heron, as well as raccoons and other things that if the water is clear and the fish are just hovering and doing their fish thing, they're going to get killed, they're going to get seen, and they're going to get eaten. So now that we're going to have clear water, we have to protect the fish. We also think a good way to do that is to maybe build a little dock that comes about halfway into the water. That'll give us easier access to some of our mechanics that are going to be down at the very bottom, but it'll also give the fish a place to hide. All of that said, we then have to refill this pond with 150,000 gallons of water. And that costs. Rain is going to help. Rain is definitely going to help, but it's not going to fill this entire pond. So we're going to have to put probably 100 out of 150,000 in ourselves. And we can't get that for free. That we've got to pay for as well. I believe every 10,000 gallon load costs $200 or $300. So when you start to add it all up, it is going to be a very, very big expense by the time we're all done. Again, not part of what we budgeted for, but for the health of a lot of animals that we have here, it's an absolute necessity.